All right, well, good morning. There's that good, strong good morning coming in here. We're kind of rolling into the end of summer. School's like on the horizon. Everything's changing over again. Here we go. But anyway, it's good to be here. I have seen over the last few weeks just a lot of new faces walking through the doors here. And so that means we have lots of guests. And if you are a guest, if you're new today, you've been coming just for a few weeks. We just want to say a special welcome that we are glad that you are here. We appreciate you coming and checking us out. If there's any way that we can serve you, you can just indicate that on that card that Pat talked about earlier. Drop that in the basket later on the service, and somebody will be in touch with you. But we would love to help and serve you in any way we can. And just so you know, if you're dropping in with us, we're ending a series today called Rhythm, Rest, and Work. And so we've spent this whole summer talking about these two big and very important parts of our life of work and rest, trying to understand that, our work is something that is important to us. We were designed to work. We were built to work by God. That is a part of what we do while we're here on this earth, but yet that work has great purpose. There is a purpose behind what we're doing with that work, but we want to make sure that that purpose is a biblical purpose and that we understand that God has given us that place of employment to really meet his higher mission of reaching people and expanding his kingdom. And then rest is that thing that we do that helps us work well. The rest is the thing that we have to really learn how to slow down and back up and let God do good work in us away from that work and away from that worry so that he can energize us and put something new into our life. And so there's this rhythm throughout our life of this work and rest, and having a proper understanding and knowing how to do that well is just so important to living that full life. And so we're going to land today by kind of talking a little bit more about work. Today's going to be like part 2 of last week. So if you're here last week, it's going to be like part 2. So instead of talking about rest, though, we're going to talk about work. And we're going to talk about work in way of not our job or our career, but we're going to talk about work in terms of our spiritual work. What does God need us to do for his sake and for his kingdom? So if you have your Bibles, we're going to be in John chapter 15 again, which is where we were last week. We're going to be looking at verses 5 through 8. So if you have your Bible, your phone, your iPad, whatever, go ahead and turn there. We'll have it up on the screen in just a minute. Last week we looked at the first 4 verses of this chapter, and we just want to continue on and see what God is telling us here about this whole vine and branches. Just a reminder of the setting, in which Jesus is giving this teaching. He's with his disciples. It's the night before he goes to the cross. They're probably either on their way to Gethsemane or in Gethsemane or somewhere nearby. They've come across a vineyard. And Jesus, as he always does, takes an opportunity at the vineyard to stop and to do some teaching and to say things like, I am the vine and you are the branches and we want to bear fruit. And so that's kind of like the general idea of what's happening here. But specifically, here's what he says in verses 5 through 8. He says, I am the vine and you are the branches. If you remain, or we used the word abide last week, it's also a good word. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So Jesus is teaching a very clear message here about the whole purpose, like our purpose and his purpose. Let's be clear. He is the vine. We are not the vine. We are the branches, and we are to remain connected to the vine. That is the only way we're ever going to see anything good happen in our life. Apart from the vine is not a good life, either here on this planet or one day in eternity. And he's saying, look, to live that full life here and then, you need to abide in Jesus. Stay connected to him. Last week, we used a graphic to kind of talk about this whole rhythm of our spiritual life. So let's go ahead and put that back up here today. We'll just kind of as a reminder of how this goes for us. So really, the rhythm kind of starts over here with abiding. Remain is what the NIV says, but abiding in Jesus Christ. To abide means to stay connected to be in, to be gleaning from, all of those things. So when we're abiding in Christ, when we're, on a regular basis through our spiritual disciplines, remaining connected to him, that's when good things happen. But also, this process includes something that may hurt. It may not be fun, but this whole pruning thing. When Jesus kind of gets in our heart and we allow him to do that, he might find something in us that's not good, something that needs to go, something that maybe we've been hanging on to. maybe a bad habit, maybe a bad pattern, something going on there that he says, look, man, we got to get rid of this because we need this good fruit to grow, and this right here is causing a problem. So through this process of abiding in Jesus, this pruning happens, gets that stuff out of our life, so that now we begin to grow again, which is the whole process in the vineyard too. And through growing, then we become fruitful in our life. And that's the way that this should go. And we kind of joked last week, like if you find yourself straining to pop out a grape, straining to produce a good fruit in your life, straining to be good, straining to try to do something good for God. And if it's hard, you got to wonder what's going on here. Maybe I kind of missed the abiding part here. Maybe there's some stuff in my life that needs to go. Maybe I haven't really grown yet to the point where I'm ready to do that. So you see this kind of pattern right here, you get that. And so the end result of that, though, is this fruitfulness. That's the work that we're going to talk about today. That's the spiritual work that God is looking for in every single believer. And so that's how we do that. You know, I was thinking about it this week, it's like there's no such thing as a fruitless Christian. All right, there's no such thing as that. People who have given their heart to Christ and have chosen to live for Him naturally bear fruit. Fruit should be seen in our life. And so I'm reminded of that all the time. It's like we need to just constantly keep a check on that, like how's the fruit bearing going in our life? And, you know, have we really relented and bowed the knee and given our life to Him? Because there should be fruit there. And also, we don't bear that fruit on our own. There is nothing in us, normally or naturally, that allows us to bear the fruit that God needs to be born in the kingdom. All of that comes from God. It comes through that connection to Christ. That's the only way we're ever going to be able to do it. In Philippians 1, 9 through 11, Paul says it like this. Says, "This is my prayer, that your love may abound more and more in knowledge and depth of insight, so that you may be able to discern what is best and may be pure and blameless for the day of Christ, filled with the fruit of righteousness that comes through Jesus Christ to the glory and praise of God." The fruit of righteousness. Righteousness, another word, is right living for God. That's what righteousness is. And so if that's ever going to take place, it's only going to happen through that connection to Christ. And so this is our spiritual work. Now, when it comes to kind of practically living this out and actually making this happen on a regular basis, there's also some truths that we kind of need to understand that Jesus is telling us in this passage as we go through this process. And the first truth is just this, that we need to recognize the vineyard belongs to God. The place in which we live and we grow and we bear fruit and all of these kinds of things, this is God's vineyard. We don't have ownership of it. And we are blessed, every day I'm like, man, I'm just blessed to be here. I'm just happy to be alive on this planet doing what I'm doing, because there's not a one of us that's here except that God decided you should be here. You didn't put yourself here. God put us here, right? It was His goodwill and pleasure to say, I want you on this earth. And so with that in mind, we're reminded, okay, so everything that's here, I didn't create it. And anything that I have that is in my life, God put that in my life. So I technically don't own anything. I'm just passing through. So anything that I have is like, I'm just leasing it because I'm not going to be here forever. Everything I have is just, it's to help me get through this life to serve the Lord, which is the ultimate purpose, so that one day I will move on and go to heaven. So we got to be careful with how we handle the vineyard. It's not all ours. And we also got to remember that we don't get to tell the gardener how we should be gardened. We're a branch. Heaven forbid the branch jump off the vine and say, you know what, I'm sick of this. I really don't like the way you keep pruning me. Bob the branch over there doesn't get pruned as much as me. Why don't you prune him some more, Or I don't like this soil you put me in. That soil looks a lot better over there. Can we be on row 2? I would like to live on row 2. They have more shade too. I'd like that, In our life, we don't get to say, God, I really wish that you would handle me this way, that you wouldn't put so much struggle in my life, or that you could have given me that life over there that person is living, or why can't I have their gifts, or blah, 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 blah. You can go on and on. But that's not how it works. We don't own this thing. God knows best. Do you agree with me on that? God knows best? What's right for your life? He does. And He has the best life for us. But we have to relent. We have to give up something that nobody wants to give up, and that's control. And it's hard because we live here and we have to function with things around us, and so we get attached to whatever's on this earth, and then, you really find out whether you're attached to something when you lose it. You worked hard for your money, you worked hard for your retirement, you worked hard for this job, all of a sudden you lose it. How do you feel about that? Pain and anguish, and I earned that, I did that. Sometimes you might even shake our fists at God and say, that was mine. Really? Was it yours? Are you sure? Anything that is precious to us that we lose, man, it's hard. Don't get me wrong, I get it. It's hard to lose things. It's hard to lose people. It's hard to lose situations. But ultimately, we have to remember that, we're attached to something that is eternal. This stuff that we put in our life here is not. And so we have to be very careful with how we handle this world, right? How we handle this earth and everything that goes on as we're passing through it. Remember, you know what, God? You're the owner. You're the gardener. You're the master. You're smarter than me. You know more than me. You see tomorrow. I don't see tomorrow. So I give you my life because that's the best place my life could be. And in Psalms, it's in the Psalms. Hold on just a minute. I'll get there in just a second. Okay, Psalms 24:1, it says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. In other words, declaring him the owner, the master gardener, and that we should be very careful with how we handle that and not get confused. There's a great story about this elderly woman who was very independent, lived by herself, and because of her independence, she decided that whenever she went out, she needed protection, so she bought a gun. She was a gun-toting granny, and she put it in her purse. And she was never believing she would ever have to use it. She just thought it made her feel better whenever she would go out. But one day she comes out of the grocery store with her groceries, and she goes to get in her car, and she looks in, there's 4 guys in her car. And she was so mad at crime and everything that was going on in her community, it just made her mad to see these guys in. So she reluctantly reaches into her purse, and she kind of pulls up the gun to show them, and she says, I have a gun, and I know how to use it, and you better get out of my car. Well, they didn't think anything twice about it. Doors are opening. They're flying out of there. They're flustered. She's flustered now. She drops her gun back in her purse, and she gets in the car, and she can't find her keys, and she's fumbling for the keys, and she finally gets them, and she puts it in. She can't get the car to crank, and she's just all messed up. And she's looking around because she's like, I hope they don't come back, while I'm sitting here. But as she's looking around, she looks about 3 parking spaces over, and she sees a car that looks amazingly like hers. And as she looks at it, she thinks, oh my gosh, that's my car. I'm a criminal. What have I done in my own community? And so she gets her groceries, and she gets all her stuff, and she puts them in that car, and she cranks it up, and she's like, I got to go to the police, office. And so she goes downtown, and she goes to the police station, and she gets behind the counter, and she's like, officer, I just have to tell you what happened. And she unfolds the story of how she, did this, and she didn't know what was going on. And he starts busting out laughing, and he's rolling around in his chair at her story, and he points down to the end of the counter, and there are these 4 frightened young men who are telling them the story about this gun-toting granny that hijacked their car and tried to take it away from them. And he just thought that was the funniest thing ever. And so she apologized to him, and, the whole story, and everything was fine, everything was forgotten. So what's the lesson? What's the moral here? Don't mess with Granny. Wherever you are, you just pay attention. No, that's not the lesson. The lesson is know what you own and what you don't. Because if we get that mixed up, if we get that confused, things don't go very well. And we just want to be sure that everything in our life, including our life, has been given over to the Lord for his purposes. Now here's another truth for you. As we live this life and as we bear this fruit and all of this, to be clear, God wants us to bear as much fruit as we can through our life. I mean, the gardener that goes into the vineyard, he wants to see a lot of fruit on the vine. And it's the same thing with our lives. He wants us to bear as much fruit as we can as we go about our days. In John 15, in verse 8, it says, this is to my Father's glory that you bear, what? Much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. Not a little fruit, not one fruit, much fruit, as much as we can. And really that kind of gets back to our ultimate purpose, that our purpose is to bear this fruit. It is a part of our mission. And the only way that will happen again is to remain connected to Jesus and to his life. I was reading an article this week, and there was a great quote in there. The article was called A Purpose-Driven Cosmos, but in there, the author says this, and at first I didn't like it, but then I came back around to it. He said, for too long, we've called unbelievers to invite Jesus into your life. That's how we've said that. Invite Jesus into your life. Jesus doesn't want to be in your life. Your life's a wreck. Jesus calls you into his life. And his life isn't boring or purposeless or static. It's wild and exhilarating and unpredictable. Now, I mean, I've talked about that all the time, that's what we do. We invite Jesus into our life, and I think that he would have to relent and believe. When we accept Christ, we accept the Spirit of Christ into our life, who changes us and enables us to do what we're doing. But you know what? He's so right in another way, too, that also we are jumping into the life of Jesus. That's what we're committing to. We're saying no longer am I going to live the life the way I want to live it, but I'm choosing to jump into Jesus' life. And so when we read the gospel and we look at how Jesus lived, that's the model for us. And Jesus didn't sit in a cave and read all 24 hours a day. That's not what he did. Man, he was out, he was healing, he was feeding people. He was with sinners, he was in the synagogue. I mean, there were so many things that Jesus was doing to bring about change in the world and in the community in which he lived. He was out there doing it. It was this wild and unpredictable life. And he's like, look, you sign up to be with me. It could be wild and unpredictable. If you choose to live a life that is counter to this world, if you're going to live a life that's different than everything around, it's going to be kind of crazy, but stick with me. It'll be the best life you could live. Best life you can live. And really, ultimately, that's what we want to do, right? We want to live full on. Not halfway, not part of the way, not a grape or two that we produce along life's journey. Full on. As much as we can produce for the sake of Christ. And to live out the purpose that God has given us. Because you know what? When you find that purpose and you know that God created you for a reason, it's like, man, you embrace that. Nothing else can compare to that purpose. And so you just start taking things away that have nothing to do with the purpose that God created you for. And you begin to live for that. That's how this should work. But if you've ever lived a different life than that, that's tough. It's living on the road to nowhere. Have you ever heard of that? There's actually a road it's in North Carolina, called the Road to Nowhere. It's hilarious. It was supposed to connect Bryson City to Townsend, Tennessee, I think it was. They started building this road, but they ran into some problems, so they had to end the project. So what you've got is this $58 million road to nowhere. It goes and runs for a while, then it ends at a tunnel in a mountain, and that's the end of the road. It doesn't really take you anywhere. But you know what? You can ride on it, and it's smooth, and it's beautiful, and there's great scenery, but you're not going anywhere. In a way, it's such an illustration of life. I mean, we can live our lives, and we can sort of keep going down this road, but without Christ, it's like a road to nowhere. Without serving him and living on purpose, it's a road to nowhere. We don't know, where are we going? What is the ultimate end? And when we keep asking that question, we have to wonder, maybe God is trying to lead us back to him. God, what is the purpose? Why am I here? What should I do? And if you ask that, he'll show you. That's the comforting thing. He will show you. He will make himself known to you if you will seek him. Which leads me to this last thought that, bearing fruit is something that we do all of our life. We don't just pop out a fruit and say, I grew a grape. I'm done. I did good. And we move on. Which is the equivalent of saying, I went on a mission trip. I served on a Sunday morning. I talked to that person one time. That's good. That's a start. But it's this lifelong process of giving ourselves to him. No matter how old we are, how young we are, we live our life for the sake of Christ. And bearing fruit is something that we get to do. And bearing that fruit means enabling the gift that God has given us, that spiritual gift that he's put in every single one of us here. Every one of you have a gift, and that gift is like a tool that we use to build the kingdom. And tools are very important, put in the hands of the right person. If you give a logger a golf club and you give Phil Mickelson an axe, that's not going to go well for either one of them, as the logger just beats the tree with a 9-iron, all day long. Give him about 30 minutes, he's going to be done. Phil Mickelson's out there trying to hit a golf ball with an axe, splitting the ball all over the place. He's going to be done. They're going to be completely ineffective in what they're supposed to be doing. Get them together, exchange the tools. You get the axe, you get the golf club, go out and do your thing. Massively productive at that point. Everybody's happy. because they're using the tool that they're supposed to be using. In the same way for us, if we ever find ourselves spiritually burned out, we got to wonder, maybe I'm not enabling the gift that God has given me. Or maybe I'm trying to be something I'm really not supposed to be. Because God has given us naturally, there's something naturally in us that we are called to do. Some of you are extremely hospitable, and you are good at having people at your home. You're good at welcoming people here on Sunday morning. Maybe you're really good with kids. You have the fruit of patience, forbearance, and you're good. And you have a way of talking to children that they just get what you're saying, and you can speak spiritual truth, or maybe with youth. You're good, college students, whatever that thing. You have a way to serve the Lord in this kingdom. You have something to offer. The gift of help, the gift of generosity. I don't know what that is, but God has given us all something to be used as a tool to building his kingdom. And it's this lifelong thing that we get to do. In Titus 3:14, Titus is probably the most unquoted verse in an unquoted book in the Bible. But here you go. He says, our people must learn to devote themselves to doing what is good in order to provide for urgent needs and not live unproductive lives. Not live unproductive lives. We don't want to live unproductive lives, right? And time just keeps clicking. So these are things that we have to hang on to quickly and understand and begin to see happen in our life. And the psalmist even says it like this in Psalm 1:1-3. He says, blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked or stand in the way that sinners take or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord and who meditates on his law day and night. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither, and whatever they do prospers. It's beautiful imagery of God's goodness being that stream. We're that tree planted where our roots are sinking deep into there, being nourished by him. The leaves and the fruit are growing off of us normally and naturally. And you know what? Our life is being lived to the fullest for the sake of Christ and growing his kingdom in all that we do. And so really kind of to wrap not just today up, but the whole series up, it's this beautiful rhythm of working and resting in him and working, and allowing God to naturally do the good work in us as we give ourselves to him. He won't do it unless we give ourselves to him. He won't force it on us. We have to bow the knee, release control, and say, God, I give you my life, my future, the things around me, everything you have put into my life. You are good. Thank you for the good things. Guide and direct what I do. And one last thing, this quote by Brother Lawrence. We read this book called Practicing the Presence of God this week, and in there Brother Lawrence says this. He says, God isn't impressed so much with the dimensions of our work as with the love in which it is done. At the end of the day, he wants all the fruit that we can possibly bear, but we leave that up to him. But he's like, look, if you don't do this with love, there's nothing good about it. Everything you do out of love for Christ, love for people, do that. Amen? All right.